Have you ever noticed that some men seem to disappear after they turn 60? One day they're attending family gatherings, answering every phone call, and trying to stay connected to everyone around them. Then suddenly, something changes. They stop showing up. They stop explaining themselves. They stop chasing friendships that no longer feel genuine. To the outside world, it looks strange. People assume something must be wrong. He's lonely. He's depressed. He's becoming antisocial. He's given up on life. But what if the opposite is true? What if these men haven't given up on life at all? What if they've simply stopped giving their precious time and energy to people, situations, and expectations that no longer serve them? The truth is that many senior men over 60 reach a point where they begin to see life differently. They start realizing that time is no longer an unlimited resource. Every day becomes more valuable. Every conversation matters more. Every relationship is carefully evaluated. And that's when something powerful happens. They stop living for everyone else, and they start living for themselves. Most people don't understand this transformation because society teaches us that being constantly surrounded by people is a sign of happiness. We're told that a full social calendar means success. We're told that being alone is something to fear. We're told that silence is loneliness. But many older men discover a truth that younger people often miss. Being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. Loneliness is painful. Solitude is peaceful. Loneliness feels like emptiness. Solitude feels like freedom. And once a man experiences genuine peace, he becomes very protective of it. Think about everything a man has experienced by the time he reaches his 60s. He has spent decades working, decades solving problems, decades providing for others, decades sacrificing, decades putting himself second. He has dealt with difficult bosses, stressful jobs, financial pressures, family responsibilities, unexpected losses, broken promises, disappointments, heartbreak, failures, and victories. He has carried burdens that most people never see. For years, he woke up every morning and did what needed to be done, regardless of how he felt. He pushed forward. He endured. He survived. But eventually, a question begins to emerge. How much longer should I spend my life trying to make everyone else happy? That question changes everything, because for the first time, he begins to realize that he doesn't have to keep saying yes. He doesn't have to keep attending events he doesn't enjoy. He doesn't have to keep listening to endless drama. He doesn't have to maintain relationships that leave him exhausted. He doesn't have to tolerate disrespect simply because someone is family. He doesn't have to pretend anymore. And that realization is incredibly liberating. Many people mistake this for becoming cold. In reality, it's becoming selective. There's a huge difference. When you're younger, you often collect relationships, you accumulate acquaintances, you build large social circles. You try to be liked. You try to fit in. You worry about what people think. But as men get older, something shifts. Quality becomes more important than quantity. A man who once had dozens of friends may suddenly realize that only a few truly care about him. He notices who calls only when they need something. He notices who disappears during difficult times. He notices who brings negativity into every conversation. He notices who drains his energy. And little by little, he begins making decisions. Not dramatic decisions. Not angry decisions. Quiet decisions. He stops reaching out. He stops chasing. He stops forcing connections. And often, the relationships disappear on their own, not because he ended them, but because he stopped carrying them by himself. One of the most surprising lessons many senior men learn is that some relationships exist only because they were doing all the work. Once they stop making the effort, the relationship collapses. That realization can be painful, but it can also be enlightening, because it reveals who genuinely values them. It reveals who truly belongs in their life, and that clarity becomes priceless. Another reason many men over 60 cut people off is because they've become experts at recognizing patterns. Experience teaches lessons that youth cannot. An older man has seen manipulation before. He's seen dishonesty before. He's seen fake loyalty before. He's seen selfishness before. He's seen empty promises before. He doesn't need years to identify unhealthy behavior. He can often recognize it within minutes. And unlike his younger self, he no longer feels obligated to tolerate it. When he sees a pattern that threatens his peace, he simply steps away. No argument, no announcement, no drama. He just leaves. And that's often misunderstood. People expect explanations. They expect debates. They expect conflict. But older men often realize that not every situation deserves their energy. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence. Sometimes the strongest boundary is distance. And sometimes protecting your peace requires walking away without looking back. There is another reason this happens that few people talk about. As men age, they become more aware of mortality. This isn't necessarily a sad realization. In many cases, it's a motivating one. When you're young, life feels endless. You assume there's always more time, more opportunities, more chances, more years. But eventually, reality becomes impossible to ignore. Time is finite. And when a man fully understands this, his priorities change dramatically. Suddenly, wasting time feels expensive. Meaningless conversations become exhausting. Pointless arguments become unbearable. Toxic relationships become unacceptable. He begins asking himself a simple question. Is this worth my remaining time? If the answer is no, he walks away, not out of anger, not out of wisdom, because he understands something many people learn too late. Time is the most valuable thing we possess. Money can be earned again. Possessions can be replaced. But time only moves in one direction. Once it's gone forever. That's why many senior men become incredibly protective of their schedules. They would rather spend an afternoon reading than attending a gathering filled with superficial conversations. They would rather take a quiet walk than engage in unnecessary conflict. They would rather enjoy their own company than sit in a room full of people who make them feel exhausted. And honestly, who can blame them? After decades of noise, peace becomes precious. After decades of obligations, freedom becomes sacred. After decades of pleasing others, authenticity becomes non-negotiable. Perhaps the most misunderstood part of this transformation is that it isn't driven by hatred. These men don't hate people. Many of them love people deeply. They simply become more intentional about who receives access to their lives. Their circle becomes smaller, but it also becomes stronger. The people who remain are trusted, respected, valued, appreciated. These are the people who show up consistently. The people who don't create drama. The people who bring peace instead of chaos. The people who understand that friendship doesn't require constant attention to remain meaningful. Older men often discover that a few genuine relationships are worth more than 100 shallow ones. And once they experience that truth, there's no going back. Something else happens during this stage of life. Many men finally reconnect with themselves. For decades they were husbands, fathers, employees, providers, and problem-solvers. Their identity became tied to their responsibilities, but now, for the first time in years, they have space to think, space to reflect, space to rediscover interests they abandoned long ago, space to simply exist without constantly serving someone else's agenda. They begin reading again, learning again, exploring again, creating again, living again, and they often find immense joy in simple things. A quiet morning, a cup of coffee, a walk at sunrise, a favorite book, a peaceful afternoon, a hobby they love. Moments that once seemed ordinary suddenly become extraordinary because they are finally experienced without pressure, without deadlines, without expectations, without noise. This is why many older men seem happier alone than people expect. They have discovered that happiness doesn't always come from having more people around. Sometimes happiness comes from having fewer distractions. Sometimes happiness comes from simplicity. Sometimes happiness comes from finally being able to hear your own thoughts. And that is a gift many people never experience. The world constantly tells us to do more, be more, buy more, achieve more, socialize more. But many senior men reach a point where they realize they don't need more. They need less. Less drama, less stress. Less negativity. Less pretending, less pressure. And in that simplicity, they find something remarkable. Contentment, real. Contentment, not excitement. Not temporary. Pleasure, not validation from strangers. Contentment, the quiet satisfaction of knowing who you are and no longer needing approval from everyone else. That level of peace is incredibly powerful, and once a man finds it, he protects it fiercely. So the next time you see a senior man who spends a lot of time alone, don't immediately assume something is wrong. Don't assume he's lonely. Don't assume he's unhappy. Don't assume he's broken. You may be looking at someone who has finally figured life out. Someone who understands the value of peace. Someone who no longer needs constant validation. Who has learned that protecting his energy is not selfish. It's necessary. You may be looking at a man who spent decades serving others and has finally decided to give himself the same care he gave everyone else. That isn't weakness. That isn't failure. That isn't giving up. That's wisdom. Because true maturity isn't learning how to gain the world's approval. It's learning when the world's approval no longer matters. And perhaps that is the real reason so many men over 60 cut people off. Not because they hate people. Not because they're angry. Not because they're bitter. But because they've finally discovered Something more valuable than attention. Something more valuable than popularity. Something more valuable than fitting in. They've discovered peace. And after spending a lifetime searching for it, they refuse to let anyone take it away. If this message resonated with you, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever reached a point where protecting your peace became more important than pleasing people? I'd love to hear your experience. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss future content. Thank you for watching. And remember this, the strongest people are not always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones sitting quietly, protecting the peace they've worked their entire lives to find. Until next time, take care of yourself and guard your peace.